Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. I'm Giulia D'Agnolo Vallan, and this is Sag Harbor Cinema Conversation.
And joining us today is Graham Leder, is producer of the film In the Bedroom that you will remember. And here with us today, the producer for HEARTWORN Highways. It's a movie that we also show in our virtual cinema, and I strongly recommend to see it because it's a wonderful film. Graham, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for the kind introduction.
Your film grew out of your friendship with the director Jim Slapski. Can you tell us what the context of the friendship? And
yeah, this was a long time ago. We're talking about the mid-70s. I was living in London, and we met one another in Paris through a mutual friend, an American friend who from Southern California. And we just hit it off. We just liked being around each other. And he was traveling around Europe with his girlfriend at the time in a little French deux chevaux, you know, those little Citroën cars that are full of character and very suitable for him. And I invited him to make my home in London his base. So for the next 2 or 3 months while he was there, he spent a lot of time staying with me in London. And I was an art dealer. I was not really attempting to produce films. I was just, I was young and I was enjoying being an art dealer. And while he was with me, he introduced me to this music. And over the course of the next year and a half, I ended up spending more time with him and more time downtown than uptown, in the art world. And the relationship grew, and my interest in the music, and then that leads to us another part of the story, which we can get to later.
What did capture you about this music? I think that Jim always wanted to make a movie about it. What drew you in and decided to make you become a producer of the film? Because I think that if you hadn't gotten involved actively, maybe the movie would have not been made.
Yeah, probably not. You know, all these things are collaborative, and they're all, it all comes down to timing and serendipity. And I was at the time, I've been really spoiled by being an art dealer, and I had no real appreciation for what it was like to be in a business that was friendly and lucrative. And but at that time, there was the world had fallen into pretty deep recession, and it crippled the art business. And I was restless, and the music appealed to me. I've always been interested in reading literature, and the writing in this particular music is really, intrinsic to the song. I just grew interested in that, and hanging out together and listening to the music. And I was in New York for an art auction in November 1975, and there was nothing really going on. And so we took a trip down to Nashville, and that's really what ignited everything happened in that moment of combustion when I arrived in Nashville. And I went to a bar there called the Exit Inn, and Guy Clark, who's one of the 3 main characters in the film, happened to be there, happened to be playing. And Jim knew Guy through a mutual friend called Skinny Dennis. And Skinny Dennis is the person to whom the film is dedicated, and who is really the key to this world. I mean, we would never have gotten access to the world in the way that we did, and had this kind of intimate, this relationship with this group of people, were it not for the fact that we had this introduction, and it was a very formative moment in their lives and their careers, and we were just able to step right in. And anyway, right at that moment, it just triggered this, it was so vital and so different, and a world that I had no experience of it. And so...
and you were kind of the same age of the musicians, right?
Yeah, we were all about it. They were, yeah, give or take. A couple were a bit actually younger. I was, at the time, I was 25 years old. They were all around their mid-20s, I would say. And the filmmakers. The film was made by a director who was a year and a half older than me. Everybody was basically in their mid-20s. And Steve Earle, who's very well known, obviously, was just 20. So it was a...
The film you present, the film presents, I don't know, you, the film presents this group of musicians as rebels against a certain tradition or rather than a tradition like establishment Nashville. You know, there is that line at the beginning in the bar when the big man says, well, you know, it's becoming a little bit snobby. And,
yeah, well, yeah.
So
Yeah.
can you talk a little bit about the different generations of the Nashville musicians? You know, this would be the third, right? And their songs were against generation number two. And who were in this group?
Well, this group, I mean, the musicians in the film,
yeah,
really follow on directly from, immediately from Willie Nelson and Waylon Jennings. You know, they were their immediate predecessors, but they really harken back to it. Jim was very interested in the first and third generation, which is in a way what spawned the sequel to HEARTWORN HIGHWAYS. There's a film called HEARTWORN HIGHWAYS Revisited that was made a few years ago, which is also about to be released actually next month in April. They were just very anti-establishment. They didn't really want to be a part of the glittery factory part of country music that at that moment was Nashville, and they broke away from the establishment as a sort of in a sort of independent, fairly close-knit group of there was a renegade rebel facet to the music and to what they represented, and the fact they didn't want to compromise, and they weren't driven by an obviously materialistic kind of
And that's why the name outlaw country, right, which came later, correct?
Outlaw country music, I guess it did. I mean, I'm not a country music historian. I'm just somebody who really loved the idea of making this film because I met these people and I love the music.
There is an immediacy to the film, and as I was telling you before we started, by rewatching it, what I really loved the first time I saw it, and now that I watch it again, is the fact that it's very observational. You don't have a narrative that superimposes itself into the film. So there is this wonderful sense of intimacy with them. And it's almost like the songs drive the rhythm and the story itself of the movie. Can you talk a little bit about this choice?
Well, it was always, this film was Jim's vision, the director, Jim Salapsky. And he had always wanted the film to be non-narrated. It was never going to be, there was never a formal structure. But I think there is a very, very sophisticated structure to the film because it's all driven by the flow of the mood, the music, the energy in the film. And at the time, I think it was quite original because I think most films had a pretty strict, narrative line connecting, the story together. This one didn't. It just ebbed and flowed. It rose and fell. It was just. It was just full of it was driven essentially by the music and by the feeling of the film, and it was about surrendering to that. And so when I read sometimes, that occasionally someone will say, that the film has a very it's just kind of thrown together. It has a very it's just haphazard. is very, very, that's actually not the case. It is, I think it's really, I think it's really beautifully edited. And, you know, the editor was also, you know, extremely talented, you know, filmmaker.
Can you, because as I was saying before, there is this great sense of intimacy between the camera and the musicians, you know, and there is, can you describe a little bit what was the shoot like? I mean, did you spend a long time down there? Where did you see them? Did you go back and forth? I mean, what was your life with the musicians?
Well, I'll tell you, that definitely was not structured. There was no production schedule whatsoever. I mean, I decided in mid-November when I was in Nashville with Jim for just a week, not even actually, that he told me what he thought it would take to make the film. And I said, okay, let's do it. We'll you know, and we were filming, literally, we were back in Nashville 4 or 5 weeks later, you know, ready to film, but we didn't have he just had the idea that there are certain musicians that we were going to film. Guy Clark and his you know, his friends and his family and that group of musicians. And you know, Townes Van Zandt, who wasn't actually living in Nashville, was very close to Guy Clark. He was living in Austin. And David Allan Coe, who's the kind of, you know, the crazy David.
Grand finale, yeah.
Really, we got to Nashville, and we really on a wing and a prayer. I mean, we all congregated in New York. One member of the crew had always wanted to make a film. Very close friend of Jim was a protester. He was a draft dodgy living in Canada. He snuck across the border. We all met in New York. Went down to Nashville with the idea that we were going to make this film, and we got there. And the first thing we were planning to shoot, which was this was sort of in a way, it has a sort of an external logic and sort of scripted. The first scene after LA Freeway, you go into the studio and you see Larry John Wilson laying down the song, Whoopi River Bottomland. That was something that Jim really wanted to capture, was how a song is built and how the different tracks are laid down one on top of the other. I think it's one of my favorite sequences in the film, actually. But that was the first kind of major expenditure, was, you know, booking that studio for the day, you know, I don't think we even had it for the whole day. And Larry John Wilson never showed up. He said he was going to be there at 9 o'clock in the morning, and he wasn't there. And I spent the morning calling every hotel in Nashville, trying to figure out where he was. And it turned out he'd been out the night before with Willie Nelson, and he was in bed, hungover. So literally track him down, drag him out of bed, dress him, take him to the studio. And that's how you know, and I think you feel that in his voice, you know, that the richness and the sport about the whole thing. He was fantastic. But yeah, and that's how the film kind of was put together. It was literally, I would, you know, get a phone call from Guy Clark or Susanna, his wife, and say, listen, guys, some people are coming over tonight. They're bringing their guitars. Why don't you come along? And so we would pick up, you know, lots of booze and lots of, you know, and just really rock up. And Jim, to go back to your question before about the way it is filmed, he was such a quiet and such an observant. He was, I think he was an extraordinary documentary cinematographer. And we would just set up and we'd just be hanging out. And then, you know, the lights would be set up, and the sound man was just one guy with a stereo Nagra, and Jim was filming with a 16mm Claire. And at some point in the evening, he would just start filming. And it was just as the evening, you know, unfolded, that's what you get. And it was just those moments that he was able to capture by being close and being observant and being non-intrusive. He was just very, very on his toes, and everybody was. I mean, it was a you know, a very tight, small crew, but everybody was. We were having a great time, but we were all kind of also on our toes.
Everybody, you're welcome to ask question, and I can see them here, and then I will relay them to Graham. I have one follow up on this, and then there is a question from Thomas. You mentioned Townes Van Zandt, Guy Clark, and David Allan Coe, and they are the three main characters. How would you describe them, you know, individually, and the way they sort of emerge from the film?
Well, I think that the film describes them adequately. I mean, I don't know that I can add to what you see in the film. I mean, Townes died prematurely 25 years ago, you know. I think the film captures them I really think the film captures as they are. I don't know that I have that much more to add here.
Okay, from Thomas, what kind of conversation did you have, or kind of in order to make the decision about including or not including the drinking and partying of this world? Why did it feel important to the story to include it, or was it the real way into their worlds?
It wasn't the real world. I mean, it just was their world. I mean, nothing was. It wasn't organized that way. It wasn't a decision we made to make it in any way more sensational or more colorful or give it more texture. It just happened that there were certain moments when we were, you know, when we were all together. They were, and you know, we would be in that. Maybe we'd be at Guy Clark's house or another house, and we'd be there all afternoon and all night, you know. And yes, at the time, I you know, there was a lot of drinking going on. It wasn't. It was just part of the scene. It wasn't something that we either encouraged or, you know, tried to hide. It was intrinsic.
As I was watching yesterday. Another thing that struck me, it was how contemporary the film feels in terms of portraying a division, a certain kind of America, sort of a more archaic rural version of America, you know, like sort of separate from metropolitan and so forth. And it doesn't feel like it changed much. Since then, you know, and these are obviously artists, but it seemed to me that some of the characters, you know, the blacksmith or the two guys in the bar, you know, is this word that is sort of reluctant to be dragged away from their world, their own identity. Am I off?
Not at all, but I mean, we're talking, I mean, this was mid-70s, it was 45 years ago. And that, you know, that bar, the Wigwam Tavern, doesn't exist anymore. And Clarksville, the trailer park in Austin, Texas, which is where we filmed Townes Van Zandt and Uncle Seymour Washington. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's, you know, that's all changed. I mean, whether the characters have changed, I don't know. I don't know whether, you know, I think the characters are all authentic. And I think that is for sure. I mean, I think they just went on being more themselves. And I think that was part of the drinking, by the way. It wasn't just to get drunk and escape. It was to get closer to whatever it was that they felt was important. You know, I don't know.
Good.
As I say, I don't know that works so well as you get older. You know, I think everyone who survived has quit drinking. Mm-hmm. But at the time, you know, drinking seemed to be part, you know, it seemed to be part of the journey.
How I mean, it feels, you know, from the music they make, it feels like they were like at the top of their game, and were they well known to the outside, you know, to the world, in the music world outside of Nashville? Were they already very established? Not
at all. They were all just making their first albums. I mean, Charlie Daniels actually is a big country rock band, and he probably had the biggest reputation at the time. And, you know, that's the rock concert that was filmed in the high school auditorium, which you have the 2 single frame sequences. No, they were really just beginning. Guy Clark had made his first album, Old Number One, which is a classic, a great album. Towns had just, but they were just really kind of on the, they weren't part of, I mean, they were definitely nowhere close to mainstream. They were very much, I mean, even now, I don't know that they're totally mainstream. I think they're very influential, but they weren't widely known. But they were very well known within that group, within the people that mattered to them, definitely. They were emerging.
I have a question from John. Was it hard to convince them to be in the film, to participate?
Well, once we started filming, everybody wanted to be in it because it went really well, and we became friends, and we became part of their world. We filmed over a period of about, I think, probably 5 weeks in all. And I think that they got used to having us around. And if there was anything going on, we were invited. I think initially there was great reluctance, yes. But as I mentioned, because we had this key into their world through Skinny Dennis, they were ready to accept us. I mean, I think if we had kind of gotten out of hand, I mean, I just think it was quite organic. But in fact, I was approached right at the end of filming, at the very end, after the big concert in the prison, Nashville State Penitentiary, the David Allan Coe concert. We filmed him. The crew left and went back home, and Jim and I stayed in Nashville. And Jim filmed David Allan Coe in the hotel singing the song to his grandpa, which is Grandpa, I've been thinking about you lately. One of my favorite songs in the film, actually. And I got a message from Willie Nelson, Waylon Jennings was staying in the same hotel. And they actually had heard that they'd heard good things about the film because all the people in the film are sort of their protégés, and offered to be in the film. And we agonized over it for, and then Jim felt quite strongly that it would change the film. It would, they were well known. They were stars at that point, and he felt it would impact on the film in a way that wasn't necessarily.
That's a big choice.
It was a bold and stupid choice, is what it was. And, I think we live to regret that decision.
Well, but the movie's better for that.
At that time. Sorry?
The movie's probably better for that decision because it would have tipped.
It would have been a different film, and the film exists as it is. But bear in mind, it's taken the film a long time to even begin to have this sort of recognition. I mean, it was pretty much buried for many years, and only existed underground. It had a sort of cult following, and was only known on sort of bootleg tapes that were passed around. So it's really still only, I mean, still not widely known, and it's it's something that's continuing to grow. So it would have been a great, I don't know, I've got mixed feelings about whether, I mean, that might have changed a lot of things for both of us, because Jim was a really talented director, cinematographer, and I think it would have opened up, could conceivably have opened up other opportunities for us that took a long time coming. And Jim never lived to see the film recognized. He died in 2000 before it was even released on DVD, and I think that's really, it's a deeply, it's very sad.
We have a question from Maggie. Why do you think outlaw country music started to become popular at that time, at that moment in the 70s?
Why
is there a connection between the time and the outlaw spirit?
I really don't know. I just think I think the authenticity of the songwriting and Why did it become? I don't know. I don't know why it did. I just know that there was this movement, and how do movements happen? They don't happen spontaneously, but in a way, they're sort of inevitable. And there were just these people who decided that that music was that important to them. I think there's a very, very high level of commitment to the art of songwriting and of the music, and I think it just grew and became sort of undeniable. I don't know quite why, but it was ready.
I have a question from Walter. Are there any country music rebellions similar going on around Nashville or anywhere else? Anything against the popular country musicians of today?
Against, I don't know if they're against, but there are. I mean, I think the sequel to HEARTWORN HIGHWAYS, HEARTWORN HIGHWAYS Revisited, I think you get to see the descendants of the people that are in HEARTWORN HIGHWAYS. And in fact, three of the musicians that are in HEARTWORN HIGHWAYS, namely Guy Clark, David Allan Coe, and Steve Young, are in the new film. We were lucky to get them because I don't know what's happened to David Allan Coe. He seems to have disappeared, but Guy Clark and Steve Young died in the last 3 or 4 years. So we were really lucky to catch them. But I think there's still a little bit the feeling of them and us, the institution, the establishment, and, the way that the machinery of big business works, the big music business, because I think everybody wants a piece of it. But I think there's still that sense of being independent and not necessarily being totally defiant, but not sacrificing anything for that. I think the integrity is still there, and I think you see that in the new film. I think that's.
I want to go back to what you were saying before when you say that the movie, had a little bit of a tormented history in terms of being accessible. So it was made in 75, 76.
Yeah.
But it was only screened in 81.
It was screened. It played for 2 weeks at the Playhouse on 8th Street in New York.
In 1981.
Yeah.
And why took so long? Because you were lacking funds.
Nobody knew what to do with it. I mean, there were two things. One is that there were very few independent films made at that time. There were the Meisels, there was Frederick Wiseman, but independent filmmaking per se was practically non-existent. So when the film was finished, we were able it played at Sundance, which is the second year of Sundance in 1979. But Sundance at that point was nothing. I mean, it was just it was really just it was a mountain village. It was a ski resort, and it had this festival, and it was Robert Redford. But it was very, very different to what it is today. It was very modest. It was like a camp, and the film, because it was unique, just the fact that it existed, and we just a handful of kids had just gone out and made this film. I was able to show it to all the major studios, all of them, everybody, all the head of production, acquisitions people saw it, and I was offered deals to, I could have sold the film then and there, but it would have been an outright sale, and they would have test marketed the film somewhere in the hinterland, and it would have just, I had the feeling it was just going to disappear, it was just going to get buried. And so I foolhardy, I actually raised money to set up my own distribution company for the film. But it was it was badly handled. And most of the money was spent doing intense market research instead of just opening the film in, key markets like, New York and Austin and San Francisco and, and letting it play. And so it had a hard time. Also, people didn't really understand it. I mean, it was at the time when MTV was suddenly very popular, and this film is slow. It takes its time, and it's very, it's in its own way, it's quite challenging. It was just out of step with with that zeitgeist, I think, you know, in terms of distribution and how to market it. I mean, I think the film is much, much better understood now and appreciated than it was at the time.
I have a question. I think this is kind of a follow-up to that from Kelly. I think it's actually a compliment that someone said it felt thrown together. As you said before, so many documentaries now feel so curated when this feels much more authentic. How many hours of footage did you have at the end, and how did the story take shape?
Oh, well, I'll tell you, I mean, I 45 years ago, I can't remember exactly how many hours, but I think we have probably 18 hours of footage or something like that, maybe more. I don't know exactly. We were shooting on film, so it was different. So filming, you know, it's a much different process. You know, both the filming and the editing. Say that question again in terms of how it was thrown together.
Well, he said when you at the beginning of our conversation, you said some, you know, people think that the film is thrown together, and Kelly is saying it's actually a compliment because the feeling is a feeling of spontaneity, and documentaries feel very curated today, and this feels like it has its inner flow. It's, you know, it streams from an inner flow.
Yeah, I think it has a very strong organic sense of it's a base. Its own kind of the film is just pushed forward by the music and by the action and by the images. It's not formally structured, and it doesn't have any, but it does work. It works on the senses. It works you know, it works as an emotion, it's not a drama, but it works as a sort of dramatic experience, I think.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, very much.
For that very reason. And you're not led by the, you know, you're not led by the hand from beginning to end and told, you know, what's coming next. And there were people who would complain, why don't we know more about these musicians? Why don't you put their names on the screen? Why don't you do it? The fact is, we didn't even have, they're now at the beginning of the film. They were initially only at the end of the film. And it was a concession to introduce the film with the musicians. Uh-huh. The idea was to take the film on its own value and not go there with any preconditioned sort of expectations. Just to go there and go with it and enjoy it or not enjoy it. I mean, if it didn't work for you or if it was for whatever reason, I think the film just it exists, you know, in its own right, and I think it either works or it doesn't. I think by this point, I think it does work. I think people would generally agree that it does. But there are people, I'm sure, who have a hard time with it and want to know where they are. It's like people go to a museum and, you know, you look at a picture or you read the label. I mean, you know, if you know, people walk through museums and they're taking photographs, so they're reading the label. I mean, look at the picture, see what the picture tells you. I mean, in a way, that's what HEARTWORN HIGHWAYS does. It's, you either go with it or you don't. And I think if you go with it, you're in for a ride. And I think that was, in a way, I think it's quite bold. And there were a lot of things that I think in the decisions that were made that at the time were absolutely groundbreaking and new in filmmaking. And besides the fact, I think, due to Jim's talent, it's, you know, it's a very cinematic film for, you know, beautifully shot. And
from Philip, do you have a favorite story about the night out with the singers? Something that maybe didn't make it into with the musicians, something that didn't make it into the film?
Man, I'm terrible. I should have thought of that question long before this. I mean, you know, to go back 45 years and think of one night that, I mean, there was, I mean, always being around Guy Clark and Guy Clark's house was incredible because, you know, really everything was just happening spontaneously. There was no, and one never knew quite because people would be hanging around talking, drinking. He was fixing a guitar at one point, the next, you know, and there was one shot that was, that was cut from the film that I always miss, which was during one of those nights, someone knocked over his wine glass and it falls on its side. a perfect circle drops out of it. It breaks, so the glass still exists except for this one hole. And he takes the glass and he just drains the glass of wine. And I thought that's just a moment that stands out for one of, that is just kind of expresses a little bit their attitude, to hell with it. It was a kind of devil may care sort of attitude. And I think that but the whole experience was a good one, but I mean, it was also exhausting. I mean, being on the bus with David Allan Coe, driving across, driving from Dallas to Nashville to go and play at the prison. We didn't even know we were going to get into the prison. I was still negotiating. I was on the bus with it, trying to figure out, are they going to let us in? We didn't know. That's why I said, I was surprised when I found out today we're going to go there and do a concert, because he tells that story. And while they're filming the concert, what you don't see is the audience that you do see that's the white population. The people sitting on the floor of the gymnasium in front of the stage, those prisoners, that's the white population. The rest of the prisoners were surrounding, the place was packed. And the other prisoners were all black, and they were packed into the bleachers all the way around. I was up in the back in the corner with a spotlight, on the stage, and that was a memorable moment, because they were fine, but it was intense. It was very intense to be a white kid up there with this group. Every moment was sort of, was a rich one and a new one. It was a new experience.
The film is kind of a crescendo to that scene, it becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. It's a lovely scene. It's very, very moving. It's the, the shot and the reaction shot is really, really great. We're running out of time, but I want to ask you if you can tell us a little bit about the restoration. Because we're seeing the film in a restored version, and it really highlights how beautifully shot is, and and the grain is back, and everything is really. But if you can just say a little bit what was done to it.
Well, basically, the film was initially restored in 2000, when the DVD rights were acquired by an English music company called Snapper Music, and basically the advance that they gave me was spent on restoring the negative, because the film, it was shot on film, and there really had been not much interest in the film. I mean, when Jim passed away, he passed away thinking, the whole thing had been a lost cause. I mean, it's so painful, because it's now obviously widely recognized, but the negative was totally it was so distressed, it was so degraded, it barely exists. So the good news about that deal, although they did nothing with it and it got phenomenal reviews in the music press, it was just it was celebrated, but it wasn't distributed, it wasn't promoted. But at least, and now we had the film and it was preserved. And then subsequently and more recently, the editor, Philip Sharper, has gone back to the film and just cleaned the whole thing, one speck of dust at a time. And so what you see today is the negative no longer exists, but what you see is a film that's been fully restored. It was also, I mean, it's worth the effort, because the film was it was beautifully shot, and the recording is extraordinary, considering it was one man with a Niagara with yeah.
I think I have time for one more, and from Shane, did you and Jim have any favorite music films or documentaries that served an inspiration? And do you have anyone now that you particularly like?
At the time, I don't think there were any other documentaries that were that there was nothing there was no immediate frame of reference except we looked at films. We looked at films all the time, but it wasn't specifically a documentary or music film or anything like that. I can't remember what, you know, films that I would have seen that came before that would have been sort of influential. And today there are just, I mean, today there are just so many. So I don't know, I don't quite know where to begin. I think I would recommend looking at the sequel to this one. I think it's quite good.
We will show the sequel as well. Give us a few weeks when we exhaust this run. But Rivaline Zwick says, bravo, Graham.
Oh, Rivaline.
And I echo that. And I want to thank you. I really want to thank you for being here today. I know you were traveling, so this is not the most ideal, day for you, but you accommodated us, and I truly appreciate that. And after trying for a few years to do this one thing together, we did it virtually, but next time we'll do something in the theater.
Yeah, well, I apologize. I'm in Miami. It's very hot in this room, for number one, which is sweltering. And, I had a very late night last night, so I'm a little foggy. But I appreciate you supporting me with some
it goes well with the film then, and it really does. Well, thank you again, Graham, and we'll see you back east when you come back from your travel.
Definitely. Have a good trip in Italy, Giulia. It's great to see you, and thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Thank you very much.